M&A Advisors welcomes Marshall Sonenshine, Chairman of Sonenshine Partners, to today's interview. Thank you for being with us.
Delighted to be with you, Chandra.
For those who do not know what Sonenshine does, will you explain that?
Sure. We are an M&A and restructuring advisory firm, which means that we're kind of like the M&A department of a big bank that is stripped out of the big bank, stood on its own as a boutique advisory business without all of the other infrastructure of the bank. And so we are pure intellectual capital, not financial capital, and we give advice to CEOs, senior management, and boards of directors on deals, and we negotiate deals.
Excellent. And so people who are watching today are getting some free advice from one of the eminent, knowledgeable firms.
There's an old saying in our business that free advice is worth what you paid for it.
Uh-oh. Seriously, let's get down to brass tacks. Now, until last summer, cross-border M&A was gaining momentum around the globe. And then all of a sudden, the economic situation in China, how does that impact market volatility?
Well, first of all, global M&A activity reached its historic height last year at over $4 trillion. We can afford to allow a little bit of air out of the tires and still have a very, very good market. Even if we went down to $3 trillion, anybody who can't make a living out of a $3 trillion market probably shouldn't be in business. So we have plenty of road to work with. I think that one of the other things that one has to say about the M&A market is that it was the last to recover of the major financial markets after the financial crisis of 2008. And that is because cheap money, which was the principal central bank and regulatory response to the global financial crisis, will cause other financial markets to recover quickly, because cheap money means bonds and fixed income investments don't yield much, so everybody rotates their money out of the fixed income markets and into equities and other hopefully higher yielding markets, so you get that sort of bubble-like effect. But that doesn't really move M&A. M&A is a conviction market. When you buy a business, you have to have some conviction about the near and even longer term for that business. I think we reached a height for a lot of different reasons that were not truly about conviction, and I think we are not in a moment of conviction about growth. And so the things that were causing that $4 trillion to take a step back, that was kind of inevitable. I think we're in a low growth environment, so we shouldn't really expect the global M&A market to be $4 trillion as a steady state.
Okay, so you're saying it's just a connection, but what is China? I mean, what's happening in China? The economic slowdown there, is that going to impact the market?
It has impacted the market. Sure. I think when China's problems really became very, very apparent last summer, you saw some real jitters in the equity markets, not only in Asia, but in our equity markets. And I think that China has gone from a story that most people built consensus around, the idea of supercharged growth that was somehow immune to the normal pattern of boom-bust that is the emerging market growth pattern. That was the headline for the last better part of a decade, certainly half a decade. And I think in the last 6 or 9 months, I think the story has become question mark. Is China really a growth engine? Or is it perhaps a black box that we can't really read? Or is it perhaps an economic powder keg? And there is that range of opinions on the subject of China.
And what is your opinion on that?
I asked my own panel at the M&A Advisors Conference this morning, and one of my panelists said all three. And I said, well, if you're saying all three, then you're kind of saying it's a black box. And I think that is the problem. I think that when we analyze growth statistics, any of us in the economics or finance business, we are largely dependent on statistics that come from the Chinese government, and we don't know that those statistics are an accurate picture of everything that goes on in the economy, and I'm not sure they do either. So, I'm not an economist by training, I'm a lawyer, and I start with the proposition that any country that has a propaganda committee, maybe you shouldn't trust all their information, and maybe they can't either. So I think there's a big question mark about where is China really in terms of internal debt, in terms of internal growth.
You just said you're a lawyer and not an economist, so this is a perfect transition into U.S. regulations. Recently, the U.S. Treasury, action against the inversions, which thwarted the Pfizer-Allergan deal, it impacted us locally. How does that impact the cross-border?
Well, so one of the factors to your very first question, Chandra, that caused this $4 trillion expansion in M&A last year, one of the factors that caused that was the inversion phenomenon. Very, very large cross-border mergers that, at least in pertinent part, were driven by tax considerations. Now, that doesn't mean that they were only driven by tax. The spate of deals that were inversion deals took place in certain industries, including, importantly, pharma, where there were other reasons why the pharma businesses were consolidating. They were trying to save money in R&D as well, and they were trying to improve distribution capabilities and so forth. That said, tax was important. And the reason that tax was important is that the U.S. has one of the highest corporate tax rates in the world. And large multinational corporations, advised by $1,200 an hour lawyers who are pretty good at their jobs, were looking at ways to cut back on that. And they were specifically looking for ways to repatriate or bring cash that had been earned overseas back into the United States without having to pay tax when it came back to the U.S. The inversion trend, therefore, was constructed. The Obama administration said they did not like it. Jack Lew, the Treasury Secretary, said last year he did not like it. Regs were issued last year that were tepid, and regs are being issued this year that do not seem tepid at all. And in the face of that, Pfizer quit. So those deals that were tax-driven, I think we're not going to see so many of them, or they're going to have to go through another round of tax planning in order to figure out how to do this. And ultimately, the policy answer, which you didn't ask about, Chandra, but I'll say it anyway, the policy answer is we should have lower corporate tax rates.
Yeah. Do you think a change in administration, which will happen after the election, will change the horizon?
Well, it depends on who wins this election.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think that we're going to see a dramatic cut in corporate tax rates anytime soon, no matter which party won. I think if the Republicans won, there'd be more likely some movement towards that. But I think there'd be a lot of hue and cry, populist-wise, against that anyway. We have high corporate tax rates, and everybody says we have, that's a reason to cut our rates. And I said it myself a moment ago. On the other hand, we also have the world's largest economy, the world's most, in my opinion, transparent, rule of law driven economy. And it's not so bad to do business here, and if you have to pay a little bit more tax, I don't think it's the end of the world. But I think our rates probably can afford to come down a little bit.
All right. Marshall, thank you so much for being with M&A Advisors today. We always appreciate your advice and your knowledge.
My pleasure. Nice to be with you, Chandra.